Hello, great to have your company tonight. We've got lots coming up in the show. Donald Trump's path to the White House kicks off with a stunning result in the Iowa caucuses. Anthony Albanese continues to embarrass Australia on the international stage. I'll show you his excuse for sending a couple of office workers instead of a warship to help the crisis in the Red Sea. Council mayors are turning into dictators, confiscating flags that don't acknowledge First Nations people, and the New South Wales Premier is laying into them. And find out who Aussie actress Sarah Snook has dedicated her Emmy Award to today. That heartwarming story a little later. Tonight is the start of Donald Trump's extraordinary return to the presidency, despite the court cases, the witch hunts and the desperate bids to keep him out of office. If the Iowa caucuses are anything to go by, we're looking at a Donald Trump run for the presidency. And then, if he's up against Joe Biden, polls indicate this would mean a likely return to the White House for the former president. Trump today held a victory press conference where he was unusually gracious and humble. He praised his opponents, Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley and Vivek Ramaswamy. He also laid out his vision and campaign touchpoints: immigration, border control and ending foreign wars.
Whether it's Republican or Democrat or liberal or conservative, it would be so nice if we could come together and straighten out the world. We're going to seal up the border. Because right now we have an invasion. We have an invasion of millions and millions of people that are coming into our country. I can't imagine why they think that's a good thing. It's a very bad thing. I think it's a group of people that are probably larger in number than New York State. And they're terrorists. Many terrorists are coming in. I have to say that he is the worst president that we've had in the history of our country. He's destroying our country.
And he said he was not trying to be rough on Biden when he made that comment. Trump also blamed Biden for inflation, for Russia invading Ukraine, and even for the Hamas attacks on Israel. He said he could solve the war in Ukraine and also in the Middle East, and that he would make American cities safe.
If the fake news would become real and honest news, 90% of our problems in this country would be solved. They would be solved. So Russia would have never attacked. Israel would have never been attacked. The Ukraine situation is so horrible. The Israeli situation is so horrible.
It was an emphatic win for Trump in the Iowa caucuses, 51%. Ron DeSantis then came in second just with 21%, Nikki Haley at 19%. So a tight race there for second place. Vivek Ramaswamy was fourth at nearly 8%. He then spoke and he said he was disappointed in his result. He withdrew from the race, said there was no path for him to be the next president, and he endorsed Donald Trump.
I am very worried for our country. I think we are skating on thin ice as a nation.
At this point, it looks like Trump will win all 99 counties in Iowa. It's a stunning result for the former president, who's been roundly denounced for seeking to overturn the 2020 election result. Second place is highly competitive, and it is the next alternative to Trump, even though, based on tonight's results and all the polling, it looks like he will be the Republican presidential nominee. There's plenty of time still for Nikki Haley. She's only 51, some 30 years Trump's junior. DeSantis, only 45. Here they both were today after their losses.
They were predicting that we wouldn't be able to get our ticket punched here out of Iowa. But I can tell you, because of your support, in spite of all of that they threw at us, everyone against us, we've got our ticket punched out of Iowa.
It's both Donald Trump and Joe Biden. They have more in common than you think. 70% of Americans don't want another Trump-Biden rematch.
Now, the final results are still being calculated, but it's been reported that Trump is expected to win this with the greatest margin against a rival since the Iowa caucuses began in the 1970s. Iowa is a Midwestern semi-rural state. It supported Obama in 2012 and then backed Trump in 2016. In this so far, it looks like he's won in most demographics, including with female voters, which Nikki Haley was targeting. CNN reported that this result is likely to be historically unprecedented. It gives Trump the clear momentum ahead of the New Hampshire primaries. Fox News presenter Sean Hannity said that this result is a massive slap in the face to those who've sought to bring him down.
A massive slap in the face, isn't it, to all the obsessive Trump haters in Washington and the swamp, all the far-left prosecutors that have weaponized and politicized our system of justice, and all of those perpetrating one witch hunt after another, after yet another media mob cheering on their abusive political hacks every step of the way. This is a big message sent to the country tonight.
Well, like or loathe Trump, and it's impossible not to have an opinion about this larger-than-life dominant figure of our time, the beautiful thing about this result is that it's democracy at work. It shows that media, law enforcement and Twitter don't control voters, don't control democracy. It shows that people can't be told what to do, how to think or how to vote. There's been an irony of law enforcement and the Democratic political establishment targeting Trump for trying to subvert democracy on January 6, and yet their efforts to throw him in jail so he can't become president again are also, in a way, a subversion of democracy. When Joe Biden launched his re-election campaign, he declared democracy is now at stake.
Whether democracy is still America's sacred cause is the most urgent question of our time. And it's what the 2024 election is all about. Trump's mob wasn't a peaceful protest. It was a violent assault. They were insurrectionists, not patriots. They weren't there to uphold the Constitution. They were there to destroy the Constitution.
But former Attorney General George Brandis captures the hypocrisy of the left when he writes that if Trump wins, it will not be in spite of democracy, but because of it. He writes if the American people choose to reinstate him in the White House, while that may be an appalling outcome for many, it will also be a democratic one. Not a negation of democracy, but the result of it. He writes there's an unmistakable cultural condescension about elite scorn for popular opinion. And Brandis goes on to argue that from time to time, this derision becomes obvious, like when Hillary Clinton referred to the basket of deplorables. And he also gives the example of the Yes campaigners' obvious disdain for those who opposed The Voice. And it's this attitude that turns voters off. And that attitude has been on display in spades when it comes to Trump. The turning point, ironically, for Trump's fortunes was when a Manhattan grand jury criminally indicted him over falsifying records relating to his affair with porn star Stormy Daniels. This was the start, or was the first, of a series of criminal and civil cases against him over election interference, fraud, even rape in a department store. Then more recently, there's been the moves to remove Trump from Colorado and Maine's 2024 primary ballots. This has all ultimately galvanized support for Trump, turning the former president into a martyr, the victim of a politically motivated justice system, and has only encouraged Republican voters to turn into his arms. All right, let's bring in Sky News host Steve Price and the Menzies Research Centre's Nick Cater. Welcome to you both. Look, Steve, we knew Trump was the front runner, but winning all 99 counties, which is what it looks like this result is going to be, is even stronger than expected. And his margin against DeSantis is said to be historically unprecedented.
Yeah, you can join the other three candidates together, can't you, Sharri? And they still don't come up with Donald Trump's number. And we've got to remember that back in 2016, in that Iowa pre-selection, Donald Trump lost. He did not win that caucus when he ended up being president of the United States. So it's extraordinary. I mean, Donald Trump is just someone who manages to hit the right marks for Middle America. I mean, he came out after the result was clear, and one of the first things he said was, one of the two things he said, when I win in 2024, we'll start drilling for oil again and I'll shut the border. And you saw Sky News reporter Annalise, who was in the cold old Iowa all day today. She was asking people who were voting there, what was the big issue? What was the big issue in Iowa? And the big issue was the border. They don't want the border to leak. They don't want millions of illegals flowing into America and affecting jobs and prices. And so Donald Trump has hit the mark yet again.
Nick, I thought his performance today, Trump's performance today, apart from a brief moment where he started speaking to his dead mother-in-law and he looked up at the sky, apart from that moment, it was the most reasonable, coherent, even friendly towards his rivals that he's been in a long time. Do you think he is feeling very confident that he could end up the next president? Perhaps more confident even than he felt ahead of 2016?
I think he's confident, all right, Sharri. You can see that on his face, in his manner, in his demeanour. You're right that it was possibly a more, dare I say, presidential performance than we've seen from him recently, and that's encouraging, and I think this is always the way, isn't it, that the closer you get to the actual election itself, the more presidential candidates become. I'd like to say this is just Iowa, because I really would like to see a serious debate and competition for the Republican leadership. I really think it's very important. It's a crucial moment in history. I have my personal doubts whether Trump is the right candidate, but that's me. Clearly, Americans, or at least Republican voters in this case, are overwhelmingly running with him, and I think the result in Iowa does point to other states and say, look, I think he's on track for a victory, barring unexpected circumstances.
Yeah. OK, we're going to cross live to Washington a bit later in the show with Adam Creighton, also going to get analysis from Paul Monk. But right now, let's have a look at some of the other top stories today. Big front page in the Australian newspaper. It's an embarrassment for the Albanese government yet again on the international stage. The Prime Minister has failed to fulfil his promise to triple the number of defence personnel that he said he'd send to help the crisis in the Red Sea. Instead, journalist Cameron Stewart reports that Australia's only role in supporting the US-led military strikes against the Houthi terrorists in Yemen has been 1 or 2 staff officers. I mean, and the Pentagon, he reports, says that they're non-operational roles. Steve, this is very embarrassing for the Prime Minister, and it seems we're increasingly out of step with America's effort to fight the terrorists in the Middle East.
And the PM looks really weak on this, Sharri. He did 2 media conferences today, one in Newcastle and one in northwestern Sydney. He was asked a couple of questions off the back of the major announcement, and he just doesn't want to talk about it. I mean, what a joke. We're going to triple the number of people that we have in an office in Bahrain sitting behind a computer. We've got 2 people. Tripling it is what? Another 8. I mean, it is just pathetic. We were asked to provide a warship, and we couldn't do it. And it now turns out that one of the reasons we can't provide the warship is we don't have enough sailors to put on the warship. I mean, our alliance with the United States, particularly at a time when the global conflicts are so dangerous, is so important that we should just be saying, OK, yes, we'll provide a warship. Where do you want it to go? What time do you want it to be there? And then you promise to triple the number of people who are going to go to Bahrain, and we're in the middle of January. And those other 8, 9, 10, however many it is, haven't even been able to get their passport out of their sock drawer, get on a plane and get there. It's ridiculous.
You mentioned Albanese trying to defend this today. Let's have a look at what he had to say.
We do have people there, and the release from the United States made that very clear. The joint release that we were involved and participated.
He always says, makes this very clear, when really nothing is clear at all, and it takes the Australian putting the story on the front page as an exclusive for us to even find out what's going on. But Nikita, I think the point here is that our ally, our greatest ally that we need, the United States, that we need for our protection, ultimately, if they can't rely on us to send a warship, to send defence personnel, then how can we expect the US to be there for us?
We should have a warship on its way right now, Sharri. That is beyond doubt. And the Albanese government will stand condemned for having refused that. And to reduce the number of personnel, I think is I'm just appalled by it, quite frankly. But look, you pointed out one very, very good reason why we need to be there, because America, our best ally, most important allies, asked us to be there. We need to be there for that reason. But there are two others that I can think of off the top of my head. You know, one, it's a very important sea lane, crucial to Australia, to our imports. If we lose, if we cannot navigate that part of the world through the Red Sea, then it will have an enormous effect on our imports and exports and on prices, crucially, and inflation. And but secondly, look, this is an axis of evil we're up against. It's not the Houthis. The Houthis are a proxy for Iran, and China and Russia and North Korea. And there is a global interest in countries like Australia standing up and putting all the force and might they can in the way of these people.
Now, Chris Bowen in the past, as we know, has dismissed nuclear energy completely. He calls it a fantasy wrapped in a delusion. But according to a poll, and we should say the poll is by the Minerals Council, but according to a poll in the Telegraph today, 69% of voters in Chris Bowen's own electorate are in favour of developing nuclear power. Similar figure, 67% support the removal of Australia's ban on nuclear energy. Steve, is this a sign that it's Chris Bowen who's actually wrapped in a delusion?
He's completely delusional. He was at the second media conference with Anthony Albanese today, and they were talking about installing solar panels on social housing, which might be a nice thing to do. But Chris Bowen then went on about, when the summer's as hot as the summer that we've had, then we need to be able to provide cooling for people who live in social housing. Well, I don't know that Chris Bowen, where he's been. I mean, we've had a summer where we've had rain and floods. I mean, Bowen is the least effective minister in the government, beyond probably Linda Burney, and he is just completely delusional about where we're going to go with these emission reductions. I mean, Australia is headed for targets that it won't get to, and we're not going to have the infrastructure in place to provide the power that we need. And so we need to be looking at nuclear. I've just come back from Japan, where they've got all their nuclear power plants turned back on largely after Fukushima all those years ago. Japan uses gas and nuclear because they don't have the natural resources we have. As a country, we're stupid if we don't use everything available to us as much as we possibly can.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to bring you some breaking news now. Backlash, as we know, has been growing over Penny Wong's refusal to visit the sites of the Hamas massacre. I spoke about it at length on the show last night. But she's in Jordan right now. She's just held a press conference. You won't be surprised, Nick Cater, she's announced an additional $21 million on top of the, I think it's $25 million that she's already given to Gaza. She's saying that this $21 million is going to be directed to the occupied Palestinian territories. Of course, nothing for Israel. No aid at all has gone to Israel. Nick Cater, what do you think about how she's handling this trip? It is clearly not a solidarity visit with Israel.
It's not, Sharri, and every time she opens her mouth, she shows that even more. She's not with Israel. The decision not to visit the site of those the October 7th pogroms is shocking, appalling, embarrassing. I'm embarrassed for Australia, and I'm embarrassed for my Israeli friends. So that in itself is bad enough. Sending aid money to Gaza right now, that is madness. That is absolutely bonkers. I mean, we already know that most of the aid money, if not all the aid money that was sent before, ended up in the hands of Hamas, and they used it for what they wanted to use it for, which was tunnels and missiles, not for helping people. I just think that it's time for her just to get with the plot on this one and realise what every decent liberal democracy around the world is doing, which is standing shoulder to shoulder with Israel. No ifs, no buts, Penny Wong. Just get with the plot.
Yeah, and by the way, Albanese had to defend this again today, and he did so by claiming that Canada's foreign minister didn't go to those sites of the massacre where Jews were slaughtered. But he failed to mention all of the other world leaders who did visit the massacre sites: David Cameron, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, Mike Pence, Boris Johnson, Scott Morrison, Simon Birmingham. So many other people took the time to go visit the site, which we know has been the most traumatic and the greatest loss of life for the Jewish people in a single day since World War II. All right, Nick Hater, Steve Price, so great to have you both with me tonight. Now, after the break, we're going to get stuck into this story of Donald Trump having this amazing comeback again, his win at the Iowa caucuses. Adam Creighton will join me live from Washington. Plus, the Albanese government red-faced after one of their staffers turned up at a Republican rally. Stay tuned. Okay, coming up on the show tonight, we have a donor, a young man whose sperm was rejected by a same-sex couple simply because he is Jewish. That's coming up a bit later on the show. Also, can the Prime Minister deliver more cost of living relief without undermining his priority of fighting inflation? I'm going to have a cost of living panel who'll join me a bit later. But first, let's go live to Iowa. The vote is in. Former President Donald Trump took a commanding and historic lead in the Iowa caucuses. It's thought that he's going to have won by the largest margin ever against a rival in that state. Ron DeSantis projected to win the Iowa Silver, coming in at second place, and Nikki Haley a few points behind. Joining me now is the Australian's Washington correspondent, Adam Creighton. Adam, thank you so much for staying up for us. Local time in Iowa, 3 a.m. So, well, you've either got up early for the next day or you've stayed up, but thank you. Now, what does this result tell us about how Republican voters are viewing Donald Trump despite all of the civil and criminal cases stacking up against him?
Yeah, well, it just shows you that they've paid no attention to the mainstream media. They've ignored all the endorsements from various congressmen and governors of the other candidates, and they've done their own thing. They clearly don't care about all the indictments, the 91 criminal charges that you mentioned. His support's just been extraordinarily resilient the whole time. It's grown throughout the and this is a ringing endorsement. He's done better than the polls. He got 51%. I think most polls had him at about 48. Neither of the main challengers would be very happy with this result. I mean, they're basically neck and neck at 20% each. They're clearly going to stay in the race, the others, but you've got to say the former president's position is pretty unassailable at this point. And I think if he wins New Hampshire next week, he's basically got it in the bag.
Adam, we saw that Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley spent a lot of money in Iowa. I mean, reportedly for DeSantis or for Haley, over $100 million. They were basically living there. This is a crushing outcome for both of them.
Yeah, look, it just goes to that earlier point that you can spend a lot of money, you can have a lot of debates and so forth, but at the end of the day, people made up their mind. I mean, you're quite right. I think 35 million roughly each was spent by Haley and DeSantis, and I think something like 80 by Donald Trump. And someone worked out cost per vote. It's $340 per vote for Trump and something like $1,800 per vote for the other two. So it's been a very expensive business for the two losing candidates, if you like. And you have to ask, will this continue? Will donors keep forking out millions and millions for a poor performance? And the answer is probably no. I mean, there's no question the other two want to race on because something could happen to Trump. He could be convicted, he could go in jail this year, or there could be a health event. And so I don't expect them to pull out, but certainly the donors may force them to pull out.
Yeah. Now, I was watching Fox News earlier today. Karl Rove made the point that it is better that Trump has competition in these caucuses and primaries rather than a free ride to the White House. But is that what we're expecting? That if he wins the Republican nomination, which it looks like it's likely, pending, being thrown in jail, but even then, do we think that it is quite certain that he would be able to defeat Biden at a wider election?
Well, look, it's not certain, and it's true. Most Democrats are quite happy with the outcome tonight. Certainly the Biden White House wants Trump to be the opponent. Most Democrat strategists also want that to be the case. Look, we just don't know. Certainly last time Biden won by a significant amount in millions of votes. The question is, can he do it again? I mean, I doubt it personally. I think Trump has a very good shot winning this year because of the decline of Biden, which is just so obvious to everyone in this country, and also the state of the economy. People are furious about inflation. Sure, the rate's coming down, but it's still 4%. It's still double of what it should be. And prices certainly aren't falling, and people's incomes have not gone up by anywhere near as much. So there's a lot of anger in this country, and also there's a number of wars brewing overseas, which is of great concern. I mean, I was surprised tonight at the little caucus meeting that I went to just outside Des Moines, just how much foreign policy was talked about. I mean, you never get that in an Australian situation, but it really does worry people, even in these small communities.
People are becoming increasingly isolationist, and they don't want America, at least a section of the Republican movement, don't want America to be involved in foreign wars. I find that quite concerning because we need the United States to be the leader of the free world and not to, back away from playing a leadership role in places like the Middle East in supporting Israel just because of domestic politics. Now, Vivek Ramaswamy...
Yes, that's right.
We saw that he dropped out of the race. He threw his support behind Donald Trump. Do you think he could play a role in a future Trump presidency?
Yeah, well, firstly, I think that's a big help to Trump because he got 8%, I think, something like that, which is quite a lot, really, from a guy not even heard of over a year ago. And that 8% pretty much is just going to go into Donald Trump's column now. I mean, as for a future role in the administration, yes, I think that's what he's probably angling for. And Donald Trump quite likes him. I think he praised him tonight. He said he's a brilliant guy, and he is a brilliant guy. I mean, if you hear him speak, he's extraordinarily articulate. I mean, he's an absolute genius. I've never really seen anyone like it. So, he could have a role in Donald Trump's cabinet, or, some people say vice president. I seriously doubt that, but certainly some sort of ambassadorial role, yes, for sure.
Now, just on another topic, Adam, a senior advisor to the Albanese government, or to Immigration Minister Andrew Giles, was spotted at a Nikki Haley rally in Iowa alongside also the Chief of Staff for Andrew Giles. They were posing with someone from Nikki Haley's office. The staffer was wearing a pin supporting Nikki Haley. You can see him on the screen there with Nikki Haley. Look, the photograph was deleted. We wouldn't think that would be a problem. I mean, we support freedom of expression, we support political freedom, but if you're in the Albanese government, supporting the Republican Party has gone down like a lead balloon. I mean, surely they can't fire these people just for supporting their political opponents in the United States.
Yeah, certainly. I think it would be crazy to fire them. It was a pretty silly thing to do, obviously. And I'm surprised senior staffers didn't realise that journalists will be looking at their Instagram accounts, their social media accounts. But, it's worth pointing out Nikki Haley's foreign policies are not much different from Joe Biden. So in that sense, she's more of a Democrat figure. So, I don't really think that they're supporting someone ideologically who's all that different from the Democrats or the Labor Party. So, maybe they should say that back in response. The Republican Party is a very broad church, a lot broader than our political parties.
Adam Creighton, thank you so much for staying up so late. We'll read your coverage in The Australian tomorrow. Now, I said to you a moment ago that Penny Wong had just held a press conference in Jordan. There's no mistaking this trip now as being in any way a support for Israel. Have a look at the comments she's just made.
We discussed the importance of efforts to restart a political process which leads to a future Palestinian state. I hope that the international community can work towards a just and enduring peace, in which Israelis live in peace and security and Palestinians are able to achieve their legitimate aspirations for statehood.
So, calling for a Palestinian state, announcing aid for Gaza, but making no mention, no call for hostages to be released, not a word. Our team behind the scenes have listened to the press conference carefully. Let's bring in now intelligence analyst and author Paul Monk. Paul, I mean, that press conference Penny Wong just held, no mention of the hostages. Why is Australia failing to support Israel in this way? Penny Wong, the foreign minister, flying over there, calling for a Palestinian state, announcing more aid money for Gaza. No demand, at this point anyway, for the hostages to be released, and no visit to the sites of the Hamas massacre.
Yes. I mean, it is rather stunning. On face value, of course, her remarks sound pious and peacemaking and so on, but they're decontextualised because they have no grip on what's been happening and what Hamas did and would do again by its own account at the first opportunity. So it's not only that she's not insisting that hostages be released and she's not visiting the sites, she's not acknowledging the fundamental reality that this idea of Palestinians having legitimate aspirations for their own state has a very long history. And every time an attempt has been made, every time an offer has been made to them, going back to the 1930s, they've rejected the offer. It's not, it's not historically literate to talk as if it's just unreasonable Israeli attitudes that have created this situation. But as we both know, as most serious observers surely know, the issue that's at stake right now is how can Israel establish boundaries such that the what people like to call the militants, Hamas and Hezbollah and many elements on the West Bank, and to say nothing of the Iranians, that they are by any other name terrorists, and Iran and many of the the Palestinians and certainly Hamas and Hezbollah have constantly called for the destruction of Israel. This is not a matter of saying we want a few concessions so we can live more decent lives. It's a matter of wanting to obliterate the state of Israel and the Jews. That's the fundamental reality, which she completely leaves out of the picture.
I think your marks are so accurate. I mean, it's just 3 months on from the terror attacks. I mean, imagine if it was 3 months on from the 9/11 attacks, and there's Penny Wong more concerned about a Palestinian statehood than actually protecting Israel from the terrorists, from a repeat of the terror attack when Hamas leadership has said time and time again that this is what they want to keep doing, keep killing Jews until Israel is destroyed, when this is what protesters are saying around the world, from the river to the sea. It's an extermination call. Now, Paul, I want to ask you about Donald Trump. The entire political and legal establishment in the United States, whether you agree with it or not, they have run a campaign against the former president, civil and criminal cases against him relating to election fraud, interference, even alleged rape back in the 90s in a department store. But this seems to have only turned Trump into a martyr. Do you think all of these cases have ironically helped his political prospects?
Well, it appears clear that they have, and one could well see that as a paradox. And if you're on the Democrat side of the spectrum, not only is a paradox, but as a shock. But they need to take this into account because this is what a populist politician does, which is what Trump is. He's not an orthodox politician. That's why he not only surprised people in 2016, first in the primaries, as he's doing again, and then in winning the election. But he's kept wrong-footing others in the Republican Party. And if there are those power brokers in the party who think, we'd prefer another candidate, they're shying away from even trying that seriously because they think this man's got the popular vote. What are we going to do? And now he's saying, of course, Trump says after this thumping win, I want to bring America together, liberal and conservative. Well, that's a new tone. It's going to be very interesting to see how he conducts his campaign from this point to at least rhetorically bring America together. We'll watch that carefully.
Yeah, it was a new tone. I said that before on the show. It was the most rational kind of speech we've seen from Trump in a while. Like I said, apart from that one moment where he was acknowledging Melania Trump's mother, who passed away a few days ago, and he started speaking to her up in the sky, which seemed slightly odd. In the middle of a press conference to look up in the sky and start speaking to her. With all great respect to her, I'm sure she was a wonderful woman. Paul, if this trend...
Well, there are, if I
yes.
Go
ahead.
I was just going to say, we've got to bear in mind, and this is often left out by secular liberal types who would prefer it wasn't the case and therefore act as if it wasn't the case. But there are a great many deeply religious people in the United States.
Of course.
And so that kind of gesture would not strike millions of Americans as odd at all.
No, of course, and the evangelical vote was very important in Iowa, and I'm not in any way dismissing it. It was just not an unusual thing for a politician to do during a press conference. If this trend continues that we've seen in the Iowa caucuses, Trump will be the clear Republican nominee. But how do you see a Biden-Trump rematch playing out? And also, don't you think it'll be very important if Biden is the nominee, who his VP is? That will be essential because people will be wondering, if anything happens to Trump, who would be leading the country should the Democrats win?
Sorry, you said anything happens to Trump. You mean if anything happens to Biden?
Sorry, to Biden. To Biden.
Yes. Yes. Well, look, to answer the first part of that question, it seems to me that we've got a rematch of 2020, and what's important is this: Americans are not obliged to vote, so they're only going to vote if they're motivated to do it. And I would expect that the Democratic Party machine will crank up and say to Americans, it's very important that you vote, right? If you don't notice that there's a groundswell of popular rancorous support for Donald Trump and vote for Joe Biden, who's the only other alternative, you're going to have Trump as a president. If you want that, good luck to you. But you need to make your vote count. That's a Henry David Thoreau remark, cast your full vote. So I think from that point of view, and given Trump's note about bringing Americans together, we could actually have a very interesting presidential campaign, and we could have a very big turnout. And from the point of view of democratic politics, both of those things are actually healthy developments.
All right, Paul Monk, former intelligence analyst at the Defence Intelligence Agency. So wonderful to see you again. Appreciate your time. Now to something a little more light-hearted. It's a show many of you watched here on Foxtel, and Succession star Sarah Snook has won the Outstanding Lead Actress in a Drama Series at this year's Emmy Awards. The Aussie actress plays Shiv Roy in the award-winning show, and she dedicated the award to her baby girl.
Also, the biggest thank you, I think, though, is to someone who won't understand anything that I'm saying at the moment. But I carried her with me in this last season, and really it was her who carried me. It's very easy to act when you're pregnant because you've got hormones raging. And it was more that the proximity of her life growing inside me gave me the strength to do this and this performance. And I love you so much.
Very sweet speech. Now, still to come, Albanese dreams up a quickfire scheme to win back angry voters. Is it all too late? Plus, the housing market is taking a turn, and I'm going to be joined by that young man whose sperm donation was knocked back because he's Jewish. All that coming up. Welcome back. Well, the Labor Party is facing a crucial by-election test in Melbourne, and the Prime Minister is now scrambling to put forward a plan to help with cost of living before the May budget. But will it be enough for the party to retain the seat of the late and popular Peter Murphy, and could it make inflation worse? Well, joining me now for a cost of living crisis panel, economists Leith Van Onselen and Warren Hogan. Welcome to you both. Leith, are you worried that if there is a major cost of living package now, it could undermine the absolute priority of fighting inflation?
Yeah, look, Sharri, the government's got to be really careful that it doesn't stoke inflation here. For example, if it simply hands Australians money like the federal government did over the pandemic, then that'll obviously juice demand and it could stoke inflation. However, if it restricts its cost of living relief to sort of rebates and subsidies to things like energy, rents, childcare, etc., it could actually help to lower inflation. And in fact, the most recent monthly inflation data actually showed that the rebates on energy and rents and those sorts of things actually help to lower inflation. So it all depends on how the package is structured.
You know, it's interesting, Warren, that we keep hearing from Labor sources, there's a lot of reports in the media that the Anthony Albanese government isn't committed to these stage 3 tax cuts that they promised before the election. Just last week on television, Anthony Albanese wouldn't promise that they will flow through. I mean, those tax cuts kick in at $45,000. They're to help with bracket creep. But again, do you think that the government is preparing to come out and mount the case that they will contribute to inflation?
Yeah, well, I think that's the real risk now. If you go back just 6 months, I think most people were thinking the economy would be quite weak by the middle of this year and that the tax cuts could actually be helpful. But now we've still got this resilience. The economy's slowed, no doubt, but it's not clear that it's slowed enough for the RBA. We'll have to watch closely. But there's no doubt that the inflation side of the inflationary impacts of the tax cuts will be a worry. Whether they use it as an excuse to get rid of them, I think is very dangerous political grounds for two reasons. One, it'll be going against their promise or an election guarantee. But more importantly, the bracket creep is severe. It's having a much bigger impact on household budgets than interest rates. And of course, this is genuine reform. It's just one part of a bigger tax package. And this is the real reform, simplifying the income tax scales. So I think they would be very unlikely to go back on it, and they should be looking at other means, if any, to provide cost of living relief.
I don't want to be too cynical, but Leith, it also helps them with their budget position. You know, having more tax revenue, failing to address bracket creep is what's partly giving the government a healthy surplus.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, the data shows that Australians are paying a record share of their income and income taxes. So Australia's, like Warren said, Australia's tax system is ridiculously reliant on, taxes on productive effort, namely, particularly personal income taxes. And it really needs to be shifted and broadened to other areas that are more efficient, and also to take the strain off, productive effort.
Look, the government's also now ramping up a war against the supermarket giants. We're starting to see that they're looking at having the ACCC launch a price inquiry into price gouging, Woolworths, Coles being the main targets. I mean, it's not that this inquiry wouldn't be worthwhile. We all feel that we're paying far too much when we go to the supermarket. But I get the sense, Warren, that the government is looking for someone to try shift the blame onto here, when the RBA Governor, Michelle Bullock, has made it clear that inflation is a homegrown problem.
Yeah, I mean, my view of this is that this is just the latest political strategy to try and shift the blame for the inflation. The evidence is for price gouging is very weak. In fact, prior to the pandemic, the real issue was that the supermarkets were using their market power to squeeze suppliers, and that risked our domestic manufacturing, food manufacturing base. I did a big report on this for the Food and Grocery Council, and from what I can tell so far, the evidence for price gouging of consumers is pretty weak. So I think this is all about the political sort of blame game and trying to shift it away from basically the fact that we're still running too easy a fiscal policy, and if we do end up having more rate hikes, that's going to be what the blame is for having higher interest rates.
And the question that remains is, why is inflation in Australia still so much higher than most other parts of the world? I mean, that is one set of facts that the government can't walk away from.
Yeah, look, Warren might disagree with me on this one, but one of the reasons is that we're running an absolutely extreme immigration policy that's pumping demand, especially, we're seeing that mostly with housing inflation. So, for example, our rents are soaring. Rents are about 6% of the CPI basket. It's also filtering on to other areas, like it's pushing up demand for new homes and helping to push up new home costs. Housing alone, in total, takes up about a quarter of the CPI basket. So one of the reasons why Australia's got higher inflation is that we're running a very, very high population growth policy, and basically demand's growing. The demand side of the economy through population growth is growing faster than the supply side.
All right, thank you both so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Cost of living is the most important issue this year, one of many. Now, before we go to a break, I just want to quickly bring you this story splashed on the front page of the Daily Telegraph today. The Lord Mayor of Sydney, Clover Moore, confiscated Sydney's official flag from a Liberal councillor's office after spotting it behind him during a Zoom meeting. She decided it contained no acknowledgement of First Nations people. So this is the City of Sydney's official flag. Clover Moore has declared it's problematic. It was first adopted back in 1908, and yet, like a dictator, they went into his office and literally confiscated it. I mean, Nazi memorabilia is banned, but not even ISIS flags are banned in most states, and yet this flag confiscated because it didn't acknowledge First Nations people. Well, the Premier of New South Wales, Chris Minns, has now weighed into this in an exclusive on the Telly website. He says that Clover Moore should have more important matters. He says, if the government came into my office while I was in opposition and took a flag down, I'd be pretty angry. He says it's a massive overreaction. That is these local politicians in Sydney for you. After the break, I'll be joined by a young Jewish man whose sperm was rejected by a same-sex couple after Israel's war on Hamas began. Stay tuned. Before we get to our next guest, I just want to show you this horrific video released by Melbourne radio station 3AW. It shows an elderly man being pushed off Mornington Pier on Sunday by a group of teenagers. They laugh as the helpless man who can't swim topples into the water. Have a look.
Go, 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 Lockie, go, 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 go. Yeah, the point!
Victoria Police say they've charged a 14-year-old boy with reckless endangerment and unlawful assault. The worst part is, not only did these teenagers throw an elderly man into the water who couldn't swim, they were so proud of it that they posted it on social media. Horrific. Now, my next guest thought he could make a difference to a same-sex couple by donating his sperm to help them have a baby. But when Israel's war on Hamas started, this couple then decided that they didn't want to use his sperm because he was Jewish. They claimed that they were unwilling to navigate his identity in the context of this war. Well, Jay Lazarus joins me now. Thank you so much for your time. So they were happy to take your sperm, they were happy to accept your help for them to have a baby until the terror attacks by Hamas on Israel started. Tell me how you felt when you received that text message from them.
Hey, Sharri, how you going? I was heartbroken. I really struggled with the news to begin with. It took me quite a while to sort of get over it. Yeah, it was just a really weird, bizarre feeling to actually ever have someone reject something that I thought was just helping them out.
I mean, this is how pervasive anti-Semitism is, that, you know, it's even coming down to a sperm donation to help a couple have a child, a process that you were down along the path many months with before this happened. I thought that a comment by Alex Rifkin, who's from one of the Jewish groups in Sydney, put it precisely correct when he said that you wouldn't tolerate this sort of racism if it related to anyone else, but when it comes to Jews, it seems to be acceptable to say, oh no, sorry, we don't want your sperm because you're Jewish, because of your identity. What do you think about that?
Oh, I mean, being Jewish, I'm so proud of being Jewish. I don't feel like any, oh God, I don't even know how to answer that. I mean, we really, just because we're Jewish, shouldn't be affected by anything, you know, especially when it comes down to anti-Semitism. God, yeah.
This is a couple on the left of politics. In their text message to you, they claim that they were operating with kindness and love for every human being, that they cared for Israelis and Palestinians, but what they've done is actually racist. I mean, you're in Perth. Are you seeing a lot of anti-Semitism in WA?
Not really. We have seen a little bit. We've seen a little through a couple of the pro-Israel things that I've been to. There's been a few young people that have walked past, yelled out. But in Perth, it actually hasn't been too bad. It's been really good. There was a young guy at a beach in Perth with a swastika on the back of his, painted on the back of his back one of the days, which was pretty interesting to see. But no, not really. We're quite lucky in Perth.
Yeah, it has been horrific, I tell you, in Melbourne and Sydney. Well, Jay Lazarus, thank you so much for your time. That's all we've got time for tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 8. And right now, here's Paul Murray.